All right, November 23rd, and the Christmas movies are already here. And that's actually being kind of generous because this movie came out a week or so ago, so it was more in line with all the Christmas stuff already being in all of the stores since like the beginning of the month. Can't fight it every year. Father Christmas is Back is a brand new Christmas movie from Netflix for the 2021 holiday season that stars an assortment of actors and actresses, but the three standouts are Kelsey Grammer, Elizabeth Hurley, and John Cleese. Standouts because they were good? I don't know. They were fine, and they mostly stood out though because they're the ones who I knew. The rest of the cast I'm not too familiar with, except for the one guy playing, what's his name? Steven? Peter? Paul? Peter. Yeah, he was the guy that played the really horny young guy from Love Actually that went over to America and met Denise Richards, Alicia Cuthbert, and all of those other ladies. He was actually pretty decent in this movie. And also like the only normal one. The story of this movie is really centered around four sisters whose father walked out on them one Christmas morning years ago when they were little girls, and it's left them all with, let's say, some issues. And one in particular, Caroline, the one married to Peter, is especially beside herself when it comes to the holidays. You could say it affected her the most. Their dad leaving, or maybe just being in this movie. Her and Peter now live in the family home. It's one of those homes that's been handed down through the generations. And it's just this massive, beautiful house where every year the other three sisters come to celebrate Christmas. And this year we get to see Caroline really putting herself through the paces to make sure that this year is just the best Christmas ever. Why? Because this is the one the movie's about. Long story short, their dad, played by Kelsey Grammer, shows up more or less unexpectedly with his new young girlfriend and is expecting to spend the holidays with his family, and shenanigans ensue. See what they did? Father Christmas is Back. Family's last name is also Christmas, so they could get away with that nonsense. Now, this movie is not great, but when it comes to, let's say, fluff like this, especially on all these different streaming services, there are far worse movies that you could be watching. But we're not talking about them. We're talking about Father Christmas is Back. So when it comes to this movie, honestly, the biggest problem that I ended up having with it is that it just doesn't know what it wants to be. Sometimes it is a fairly down-to-earth story about the real sort of emotional struggles families with lots of baggage can go through, set against the backdrop of the holidays, which always seems to be the case. When the movie's like that, I'm not gonna lie, it brought up a couple of emotions in me. One or two. Especially from one scene in particular. And it was a pretty well done scene. A very simple one between the dad and his four daughters. However, most of the time, this movie is an absolutely over-the-top, outlandish, borderline cartoony look at these characters. And they are all such exaggerated versions of who they are that it very quickly becomes off-putting. You have Caroline, who is so obsessed with wanting to make sure that the holidays are just so perfect, and she's basically a robot. Then you have the rich, spoiled one, played, albeit all right, by Elizabeth Hurley, but she's the one that's all decked out in all that expensive designer garbage and plays the I'm only 35, but I'm really 50 card. Yeah, that cliche. And the other two sisters are just as cookie cutter as well. You have the promiscuous one who just sleeps around, and then you've got the other sort of quieter one that is absolutely obsessed with the Beatles, because we got to explain her hairstyle, that just wants nothing more than to work on her thesis about the Beatles. Unfortunately, none of them are anywhere near what I would call intriguing. Even though, and props to the writers for this one, they all get the absolutely most obvious character arc wrap-ups by the time the movie's over. The biggest offenders, however, are John Cleese, who plays the girl's uncle, and whoever the hell it was that was playing the girl's mother. These two senior citizens get to have all the sex. And for some reason, the filmmakers thought it would be funny to have John Cleese, at his age, act like a charging bull and rush at the mom as they fall into the next room to have sex. They thought it would be funny. You know what? I guess it was kind of funny, but not for the reasons that they wanted to. I was laughing, but out of sheer bafflement. No. Sure. Yikes! I mean, I guess at the end of the day, that all just fits with the rest of the nonsense that's going on in this movie. Kelsey Grammer, to his credit, did fine. I usually enjoy him with whatever he's doing. He's never really been a horrible actor, but his performance in this movie isn't good enough to pull the rest of the movie out of the absolute sea of stereotypes that it is very clearly drowning in. But sure, for a quirky Netflix movie, like I said, you could do worse. Father Christmas Is Back gets a 4 out of 10. It had a couple sweet moments that, sure, caught me off guard and actually made me feel. But the rest of the movie is just surrounded by the completely opposite tone that it just ends up rendering the movie as something I will not remember. Apart from that bull charging scene, I feel like that's burned into my brain. It's also kind of fun if you think about this movie as a pseudo sort of sequel / spin-off to Love Actually when it comes to the character of Peter. If you think of it as this is him when he's older after the events of Love Actually, makes it a little bit more entertaining. So what about you? Have you watched Father Christmas Is Back on Netflix? If you have, let me know what you thought about it in the comments below, and I will see you all in the next one.